We're in the book of Daniel. Last week we did a little historical perspective that helps us to understand how they got to this point, that is the Jews. We barely got started the week before, but we were finishing up some thoughts on verse 2 last time when we were in the text. And it says, "And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand." Remember, Jehoiakim has several names: Jehoiakim, Kim, and several others. Jeconiah, I believe Jeconiah was one of them, but don't hold me to that one. With part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar, Babylon, to the house of his God, and he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God. And we start tonight by asking the questions: how many times did Nebuchadnezzar come to Jerusalem, and when? Well, he came 3 times, and he came in BC 605. Remember, it was 606 that the book of Daniel picks up. That's when he carried these princes and scholars away, and the higher class people of the nation. And then in BC 597, they had rebelled again against him, and so here he comes again. And this time he actually conquered Jerusalem. You remember in 605, he did not conquer Jerusalem. He had them surrounded. They would have eventually been destroyed by his army, but they gave in, and that's when he took hostages, so to speak. And then again in BC 586, and this is when Jerusalem was totally destroyed. The temple was torn down. There was basically nothing left, as we would say today, but slabs on the ground, basically. Well, where did Nebuchadnezzar place the items that were taken from the temple? And this is important to our understanding of their thinking. It says, the text says, in the treasure house of his God. Now, we need to remember that the Chaldeans, along with most people of that time, and even today, most people, even in our society today, are polytheistic. What does that mean? They worship many gods. Today, a person may worship wealth, he may worship sports, he may combine the two of them. He can combine a lot of them, but almost all the people in our nation, even those who claim to believe in God, worship other gods as well, and it can be seen in their lives. I remember an old-time preacher one time, I heard him make the comment, and he was preaching a lesson on giving, and he said, "I wish we could just baptize the wallet of everybody too while we baptize them." Well, it wouldn't do any good, but anyway, that's just a thought. And because they were polytheistic, they believed that Yahweh was just as much a god as Marduk or any of their other gods. They believed in all of these gods being equal or somewhat equal. Now, of course, when they conquered another nation, they believed that that was because their particular god was stronger than the god, the main god of these people. But notice, by placing these instruments, these things he took from the temple, and remember, also, he didn't take all of them the first time, and he didn't take all of them the second time. He took some of them the first time, and then the second time he took some more of them, and then finally the destruction guaranteed nothing was left. But by placing these items of Yahweh in his temple, and it was probably the god Marduk, was probably his primary one. We don't know absolutely, but that one sure seems to fit the bill for him. He was actually showing respect and honor toward Yahweh. At least he thought he was. We know that he wasn't actually showing respect. He was denigrating God. But he thought that he was showing respect by putting them in his temple, the temple of his God. And so because they believed in multiple gods, we need to understand that about the thinking of Nebuchadnezzar in placing them there. Notice that the Bible says the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand. But what does that mean? What does it mean that he gave Jehoiakim into Nebuchadnezzar's hand? Jehoiakim wasn't captured in battle. He wasn't taken to Shinar. According to Josephus, he put him to death and threw him outside the city. Josephus, the historian, the Jewish historian. Now that's interesting because it fits the prophecy that was given by God in Jeremiah chapter 22 about Jehoiakim in verse 18 through 19. Listen to what he says. Therefore saith the Yahweh concerning Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, they shall not lament for him, saying, ah, my brother, or oh, sister. They wouldn't mourn him. They shall not lament for him, saying, ah, Lord, or ah, his glory. Oh, what a wonderful fellow he was. He was full of glory and majesty. Instead, look at what it says. He shall be buried with the burial of an ass, drawn and cast. What does that mean? He's going to be cut up. His limbs are going to be cut off and just a terrible way to die. And he's going to be cast beyond the gates of Jerusalem. So that fits exactly what the historian Josephus said about Jehoiakim and what was going to happen to him. That brings us to verse 3. And the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel and of the king's seed and of the princes. Who was this man Ashpenaz? Well, all we're told about him, and it's something that's important that we're told, is that he was the master of Nebuchadnezzar's eunuchs. He's the one who was charged with taking care of them. He was the one who was charged with providing their needs, etc., to making sure that they acted as they should and behaved themselves. But he's over the top of them. The word master here means master, captain, or chief. He was the chief of the eunuchs. He wasn't just the master of the eunuchs, he was also a eunuch himself. And the context shows us something about this man, that this was an important position. This word, eunuch, comes from the word sarisi, and that means, and it has caused a lot of problems for commentators. And the reason is because this word usually refers to someone who is castrated. It was used, this castration was a common practice of rulers for anyone who was going to be around their harem, who protected their harem, who delivered the supplies, food to them, all of these things. But it can also designate someone who is of a high office. And it can represent someone who was both castrated and of a high office. The evidence seems to point to the fact that Ahasuerus was both. But why are some people so upset to have the word castrated in the scriptures and to talk about it? It's because they don't like the practice. And to them it's offensive that something so cruel would be done to someone, what was the word I was looking for? Well, can't find it, so whatever. We'll just go on. So what was Ahasuerus told to do with the children of Israel? Now, it's going to be obvious that not all the children of Israel were in this position. Not all of them are going to be taken to fill this position. But he was to choose out the best. Now notice, of the king's seed, those who were relatives of the king, and also the princes. Now this would have been other high-ranking officials or high-ranking young men, more than likely the young men that it was talking about, because we're looking at Daniel and these young fellows. And so these were to be chosen out of those special people, that is, the king's seed, and those who were princes. Not everybody's going to get this education. But we should see that this is the upper class, the royal seed, as we would call it. The word children here is interesting because it is a specific word. There are specific words, for instance, in the Greek and also the Hebrew, to mean male or female. And there is also a generic term that is used. This term children, in this case, to us is a general term in our English, but not so in the original. It's a specific word that refers to a son or a male. So male children were to be taken out of the higher class of Judah that were taken into captivity. Now, when we consider the context, why does it make sense that those of the king's family and princes were to be chosen? And it does make sense, because they would have been the best educated. The fishermen of their time wouldn't be sent to special schools, but those who are of the royal class, those who are of the royal family, and those of the higher class that would be rulers of people, generals, and et cetera, they would have been educated. And so it makes sense that these men, these 3 or 4 boys, are going to be chosen. Look at verse 4. Children in whom was no blemish, but well favored, and skillful in all wisdom and cunning in knowledge, and understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and to whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. Now we see specifications. Not everybody's going to fit these specifications. These 4 show special qualities. They were chosen because they had these special qualities. They had higher education, and there were no blemishes, etc. Notice, no blemish, but well favored. No blemish, no stain. Now, I have a friend who has what's called a port wine stain. And what that is somehow the blood vessels in your body seem to come to the surface and cause it to be red, and sometimes a deep red, like a maroon almost. This friend of mine, his covers his entire face on one side, down in his jaw, etc. There was a time when he could not have been an officer in the military. But in these recent times, our time, that would not stop him from being in the military, and he was. He was he reached the rank of, was it major?
He's a physicist.
Huh?
He was a physicist.
Yeah, he's a physicist, but his rank, I think it was either a captain or a major. I think it was major. But be that as it may, it's talking about a stain. In other words, you couldn't have any kind of mole. You couldn't have any kind of defect on you that it showed a mark on your body, like a birthmark or something of that nature. You couldn't have that and be one of these that were chosen. Brown, Driver and Brown says it talks about a blemish, a spot, a defect. And that word defect is important to understand because those things were considered a defect. Greg couldn't have been, like I said earlier, years gone by, he couldn't have been an officer in the military. He could have been an enlisted man, a grunt, But he could not have been an officer because of that defect as they saw it. These definitions could refer to either or both physical or mental or psychological. And considering whom else this kind of a requirement is found. God had this requirement too, didn't he? Didn't God's priest have to be without any kind of defect? Speak unto Aaron, saying, whosoever he be of thy seed in their generations that hath any blemish, any is supplied for us, let him not approach to offer the bread of his God. In other words, he couldn't make a sacrifice. He couldn't participate in the activities that someone in that particular family could normally participate in as a priest of God. And notice that God didn't leave the idea of, oh, well, what does the word what mean? Or what does the word blemish mean? God didn't leave it to man to figure this out. The text went on to say, for whatsoever man he be that hath a blemish, he shall not approach. Well, what kind of man? A blind man? I'm out. That hath, or lame? I'm out there too. I couldn't have been a priest, even if I'd been born in the right family. Or he that hath a flat nose. My nose has been broken several times. I guess that'd eliminate me too. Or any superfluous, or a man that is broken-footed. I've had my foot broken. I guess that'd leave me out too. Or broken-backed, or broken-handed, or broken-backed, or a dwarf. If your height wasn't a certain amount, that kind of reminds me of the tomb of the unknown soldier. Did you know that all of those who walk that path have to be a certain height, and it can only be within a half inch. A half-inch difference. Have to all be the same height. No blemish in his eye. Well, again, I'm left out. Man, I'm in bad shape according to them. Or scurvy, or scabbed, or hath his stones broke. No man that hath a blemish of the seed of Aaron the priest shall come nigh to offer the offerings of Yahweh made by fire. He hath a blemish. He shall not come nigh to offer the bread of his God. So the sacrifices that were offered to God also, they could not have a blemish. Couldn't be anything wrong with them. The wool itself couldn't be messed up in any way. Couldn't have any kind of scab, scar, no broken bones. That portends to something else, doesn't it? That's how our Savior is described. No broken bones. Skillful in all wisdom. Skillful. The original word here means to be intelligent. He has to be intelligent. Can't be somebody who goes around duh all the time. I'm not sure. I don't understand. It had to be somebody who was intelligent, who had the ability to think and to reason and to come to conclusions. Circumspect, wisely understand. Wisely understand. Notice that. It had to be somebody who could separate ideas and then bring them together and understand the total meaning of sentences, etc. Baker Carpenter said that it means to act with insight, to be prudent. And so this qualification would necessitate that they be in their latter teens at minimum. Remember something about their time compared to ours. Today, a person in their latter teens is not considered one to be very intelligent, is it? Oh, they think they are. They think they know everything. But they're not yet an adult. In our time, because we live longer, because we've got an easier way of life, People don't grow up as fast as they did in those times. In those times, even when I was a boy, at 13 years old, I was throwing 65-pound bales of hay. You take a 13-year-old today and try to do that all day long, day after day, and see what happens. Out of any household, why? They haven't matured enough. They haven't gotten stronger maturity-wise physically, and because they did not have to grow up as fast to learn the lessons and be, they're not qualified. Notice cunning in knowledge. The word cunning means endued. But it's more than just being endued. Now, it's not just given knowledge. It's not just possessing knowledge, because the word knowledge signifies far more than just knowing something. In Proverbs 24, verses 3 through 4, this word is used of a building, the building of a house, the wisdom that it takes to put it all together the right way so that it's not going to just fall down. You and I have all seen buildings that someone makes, and I get kind of tickled sometimes. I like to occasionally watch the funniest home videos, and you notice sometimes somebody builds something and then they lean against it and it just all falls down. No, you have to have the cunning and the ability to build it correctly. Not only that, but to establish the house in such a way that you can understand how to decorate it in a proper way, how to fill the rooms in it with the furniture, etc. And that's how the word is used, the same word for knowledge in Proverbs 24. Nebuchadnezzar wanted these chosen men, he wanted them to be well-rounded. They had to be well-rounded, not just an expert in one area. It's interesting today, our society seems to be moving rapidly, and has been for years, to people being experts in one area and one area only. Well, think about it. If you have an office where there are a number of talents that need to be had in that office, and only one person in that office knows how to do this section, and only one person in this office knows how to do this, and on you go, what happens if that person quits? What happens if they're fired? We got a problem. What are we going to do about it? They couldn't be that kind of person. They needed to be well-rounded. And all of these designations for the people who would be in this school were showing that it had to be well-rounded. These people weren't dummies back then. We seem to sometimes think, people in ancient times, they didn't know very much. They weren't very smart. They couldn't, Ashurbanipal, in 704, they discovered, or in recent times they've discovered that in 704 to 681, during his lifetime, he had a library that contained over 22,000 cuneiform tablets. That's pretty much equivalent to a book in our time. Not quite, but pretty much, because their way of writing encompassed huge ideas all at once. They were skilled in mathematics, astronomy, the sciences. Butler tells us that and I'm going to say this wrong, I know, Pythagorean theorem was known by the Babylonians more than 1,000 years before Pythagoras proclaimed it. Imagine that. As early as the Code of Hammurabi in 1700 BC, physicians performed delicate surgeries in the eyes, and they were successful. Chemistry and metallurgy were all everyday sciences that were participated in Daniel's day. Ur of the Chaldees, that ancient city of Abraham, had hot and cold running water. They were skilled in all the mathematical sciences. They were doing geometry and physics and other things of that nature back then. And archaeology shows us that the Egyptians were doing successful brain surgeries thousands of years before our time. How do they know that? Because they found the skulls where a piece had been cut out, and then after something was done in the brain, was put back and it healed up. Imagine, these people weren't dummies. Well, wait a minute, what about the pyramids? To this day, there are only theories of how they built the pyramids, the ancient pyramids, thousands of years old. We still don't know how they did it. We still don't have, they're just theories about how they were able to shape stones perfectly square, perfect size, so that when they were put together, you couldn't even put a piece of paper between them. They weren't dumb. These young men had to be adept at understanding science. Note the New King James here. It says, possessing knowledge and quick understanding. And that's the better translation, I believe, of that phrase, as understanding science in the King James. The word understanding means to separate mentally. They were able to separate ideas, not just parrot what they'd heard. When I was learning math, and you probably, most of you in this room probably did it the same way, I remember they had tables. And you had to sit down and you started out with addition and subtraction, and you had to repeat those tables. 1 + 1 = 2. 1 + 2 = 3. 1 + 3 = 4. And on through all of the addition tables. And then you went and learned math, multiplication and division tables. Did the same way. That's just parroting what we have come to understand or come to know. The word understanding here isn't that kind of a word. It means to separate ideas and things mentally so that we can understand the various parts of something, so that we can understand how it works and why it works that way to the best of our ability. In order to accomplish this, they had to perceive, they had to be observant, they had to pay attention to what was presented to them. They had to be able to think and reason and possibly even be able to show that what they had learned in the past wasn't true. Maybe what their teacher was teaching them wasn't correct either. This word appears to carry the idea that they also then could be skilled teachers, so that they could teach others what they came to understand. The word science carries the idea of reasoning. It carries the idea of their studies not simply parroting, not parroting what they were taught, but be able to digest it, understand it, present it. And these chosen ones also had to have the ability in them to stand in the king's presence. What does that mean? What does it mean to stand in the king's presence? Well, they were being prepared to be his advisors. These men were being prepared to be called by the king to give him information when he needed it in a certain area, and it had to be a broad application of knowledge. They had to be able to serve him in the palace, in public. Oh, do we remember that they couldn't have any blemish? In other words, they had to look good. They had to be handsome, as we would say today, in talking about men. If they had had women in this position, they had to be pretty. This position also required them to be discreet. Part of the obligation of this master of the eunuchs would have been to weed out any who might have rebelled against the king, who might have caused an uprising against the king, any who could not be discreet. You had somebody that was a tattletale or something, that guy's not going to be in there. You had somebody who didn't know how to keep his mouth shut. He just talk about whatever he heard, and he's not going to be in there. Why did these chosen to serve the king have to have the ability to learn languages? Notice that was one of the qualifications. Because these ancient kings and nobles were usually proficient in a number of languages. You know, America is one of the only countries in the world where its citizens do not know at least 2 languages. Isn't that amazing? Cleopatra VII, that's the Cleopatra we know of with Mark Antony, etc. Cleopatra VII knew 9 languages proficiently. She could not only speak them, she could write them. And she could understand as she read those languages. Why would that be important for a queen? Why would it be important for a queen to have all of those around him? And in our case, a king, to have all those around him who could speak all of these different languages and dialects of all of these different people that might come before his throne. Understanding, so that nobody's going to be misunderstood. Being proficient in Babylonian, Chaldean language, the Akkadian, would help the king communicate with these. So they had to know his native language, the one that he was most proficient in. What was the tongue of the Chaldeans? That is, what was the language? Akkadian. Daniel 1 verse 5. And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. Notice what the king provided his students. The king's meat. Of course, the word meat in King James, it refers to food. I think that's probably translated that way in the New King James. The king's food. The American Standard translates this, king's dainties. Oh, his special food. All of his best of the best. The New King James translates it, the king's delicacies. The wine that he drank. The word wine here comes from a special word, yayin, and it means fermented. It's not talking about, when we talk about the wine on the table, the Lord's table, being grape juice, which the word wine could in the original, in the Greek, it could mean fermented. It could also mean the grape that's on the vine. It could also mean unfermented grape juice. This particular word here signifies fermented, intoxicating beverage. So the king is providing them with all the good food that he eats, stuff he thinks is really good, and they're provided the drink that he drinks. But the Israelites were forbidden to eat certain foods. They were forbidden to drink an alcoholic beverage. That's Leviticus chapter 11. And Deuteronomy chapter 4 gives us a lot of the details of this. This included pork. They couldn't have good old barbecue. Couldn't be gnawing on those barbecue ribs, you know. They couldn't have a lobster, a shellfish. They couldn't have a fish without scales. Uh-oh, there goes my catfish. I love good fried catfish. They couldn't eat a rabbit. Jenny would like that. Our daughter's thinking about raising rabbits in a little while for food. And Jenny said, no, you're not. Most insects. But they could eat some insects, couldn't they? What was John's food? Locust. That's an insect. So they could eat some. But there were a lot of categories of food that they couldn't eat because of the outer casing, shall we say, of the food. These young Hebrew boys are going to have to make a decision. They're going to have to make a choice. We're either going to have to obey God or we're going to have to obey Nebuchadnezzar, but we can't do both. Now, were there times when they could do both? Yeah. For instance, Nebuchadnezzar could have said, my servants have to be polite. Well, would God agree with that? Sure. But in this case, they're either going to have to obey God or obey Nebuchadnezzar. And later it's going to be seen that when a person disobeyed Nebuchadnezzar, he was endangering literally his life. The king could do anything he wanted to that person. He could beat them, that'd be their punishment, or he could go all the way to killing them. How long were these students fed the king's best food? The text says, as long as they're schooling. You say, well, Bob, where do you get that? Well, for 3 years, and then they're going to have to go before the king. Why are they going to go before the king? Final exam, he's going to question them. And those who passed this final exam probably it was probably continued to give them the best of food that he had to offer. Look at verse 6. Now among these were the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Attention is now drawn to 4 exceptional children of God, Hebrews. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. They were of the tribe of Judah. They were of the royal seed. And when we look at the meaning of their words, they all were words that glorified God. Daniel, Strong says it means judge of God. Brown, Driver, and Brown, God has favored. Hananiah, Jehovah has favored. God has favored. Mishael, who is what is. Think about that terminology. Who is what is? It's like God. Who is what God is, Brown, Driver, and Brown. Azariah, Jehovah has helped. Both Strong and Brown, Driver, Brown gave the same definition of those words. Now notice the term among these. Why is that term written? There's got to be a reason for it. I believe it may be because Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were not only part of those who were taken captive from Judah, but they were also the only ones of the Hebrews who were in that school who decided to follow God. That if there were other Hebrews in this school, they compromised. Stop and think about it. Would there only be 4 elite men in their position taken out of Judah? There would have been many who fit the category that they fit, without blemish, capable, intellectual, etc. Let's go ahead and stop here. We'll come back to Daniel 1 and verse 7 next week.